Hi, I'm Jacob Kenny.
And I'm Liam McPherson.
It's the newest edition of your barber's favorite podcast,
Speech from the Throne. We're here to bring you the latest and greatest from the halls of power.
But not with updates on the hour. We're just here to argue.
Hey, Jacob, what are we arguing about today?
Well, Liam, I have a take for you.
Okay, let's hear it.
Why are we spending so much godforsaken time talking about a man who is destined never to become the leader of the Conservative Party?
Are you talking about Preston Manning?
Yeah, exactly. I get it. I guess sometime before we were born, this guy Charest, he sort of had a shot at becoming prime minister. He gave a few speeches. They really resonated, and they resonated so much. Yeah, the whole Quebec media still lusts after the guy 30 years later. And then he infamously became one of the most corrupt premiers of a province whose history is dominated by famously corrupt premiers.
Charbonneau also starts with C.
So what is it about this guy, Liam, that has every colonist worth their salt in Canada convinced he is the man to lead a fractured and fracturing Conservative Party?
I don't know. Explain.
I don't know. What am I missing in this guy who's one, corrupt, two, a former Liberal premier of three, Quebec, and what does
Quebec
it suit
Liberals? They're
to
different.
A party centered? How does it suit him to a party that's entirely centered in the West, focused for years scandalizing and overhyping liberal quote-unquote corruption? I just don't see it. So I've been looking really hard, okay? And you know what I found? You know the answer that keeps hitting me over and over and over again. The reason this guy, this certifiable loser, who couldn't even beat Kim Campbell or Pauline Marois, and that is a low bar, Liam. It's a low bar.
It is.
This guy still gets continually floated as a potential leader of the CPC. It has nothing to do with the Conservative Party and everything to do with Canadian journalism. Now, that's to say, I think the average CPC member is now so removed from the Canadian media establishment that there's not a single journalist out there who genuinely understands what the CPC base wants or needs right now. Because Charest is playing a perfect media game. I'll give him that. He is generating stories like crazy. The constant will he, won't he, the little letters begging him to get in the race. Oh, please, Charest, save us from ourselves. This man, he's conjured up so much drama. He's sucked in so much oxygen. It is a miracle. And there's nothing the press loves more than itself. These journalists, they just trap themselves in cycles where every comment gets commented upon until, eventually a story is a story simply because it's a story already. The point is, it's a cycle, and Charest has conquered the cycle. His name has dominated the headlines, even more than Poilievre's almost, and that's pretty astounding because this guy is a huge underdog compared to the inglorious PP, as we have so dubbed him here at this podcast.
You have a point there. I'll give you that point.
Yeah. And it's great strategy, Liam. If only the CPC members lived in these newspaper boardrooms. But they don't.
Pulse Media.
So many Tory voters... It's okay. So many Tory voters have migrated away from traditional media that I genuinely believe the only people actually interested in reading these Charest stories are guys like you or me. People who never in a million years are going to actually buy a Conservative membership and vote in the race. So that's my take, Liam. Charest is a master of the game, but it's the wrong game. Instead of pointing out the absurdity of this, again, liberal running for the CPC leadership, journalists have totally been taken for a ride, and they're really going to look like complete idiots in September when this guy gets knocked off. He's not going to finish just behind Poilievre, not only behind Patrick Brown, but heck, maybe even Leslyn Lewis. His path to victory is just that implausible. And I think it's time some of the Canadian media sphere finally spelled it out.
Well, that is a fiery hot take that I look forward to taking on. But before we get started, we want to disclose that we are both Canadian federal public servants. All views and opinions expressed in this podcast are ours alone and do not reflect the opinion of the Government of Canada. Okay, so let's sink our teeth into this. First off, you sound a lot like a Western conservative. It's really interesting.
And that was exactly the type of the type of role I was trying to inhibit in that, because that's the people that are going to be voting for this.
You definitely embodied the Harperite anger towards what I would call a red Tory or a centrist conservative, progressive conservative. Basically, the Tories of yore, the Tories of yesteryear. I would say, post 2004. And there are still some in the modern Conservative Party. You've got Lisa Raitt. She's not an MP anymore, but she's still a very prominent figure in the party. You've got, I think his name is Scott Aitchison. Forgive me, that might be incorrect. He's an Ontario MP. He's definitely more of a centrist conservative. You've got Eric Duncan, the first openly gay Conservative MP. But there aren't nearly as many of them as there were in the days of Joe Clark, Brian Mulroney, and Charest is a guy that comes from that Mulroney era. It was a different party, and it catered to a different clientele, if you will. And I think because of the difference in the clientele, people view the Conservatives as all sort of this block, like this monotonous block. But there are actually many factions, as you know, in the party, and they get heated every now and again, and their blood starts to boil when they keep losing elections and they can't figure it out, and the opinions get stronger and stronger, and tensions like these boil to the fore. But I think that is exactly what a Harperite would say. I will say that.
Yeah. And I think it's reasonable that a Harperite would say that, because those are the people that have really had control of the party, and it's difficult for me to see how anyone else is going to take control. And I totally I get your point before when you were interjecting about the Quebec Liberals are not the same as the federal Liberals. It's totally true. They're much more right wing in Quebec, but the Conservative Party has spent so much time acidifying the name liberal. Like, that's just, it's a word that
It's
evokes
toxic.
Yeah, exactly. It evokes such horrendous feelings, like in my home province of Alberta. Like this, there's no such thing as a liberal party in Saskatchewan or Alberta anymore. Like, it's that brand has been destroyed in the heart of conservatism, so much that there are liberals there that just basically run for the NDP because there's
Right.
no other option. And I do think that Charest is going to have a lot of difficulties reframing his leadership of a party whose very name evokes horror in the members that he's trying to court.
Right.
It's a very easy attack from Poilievre, and Poilievre is the master of the easy attacks. It's just it's a cudgel that he's handing over to the opposition to be
Right.
beaten with continuously, and I don't see how he's going to overcome that. The only thing I'll give him is Patrick Brown. Actually, is an interesting addition to the race, where potentially I can see a future where Patrick Brown can recruit a lot of those centrist Ontario PC types into the race, and potentially, if Patrick Brown drops off early on in the voting, maybe those guys, they give a second or third round pick to Charest.
Right.
But I think, honestly, if you look at if I'm trying to compare the popularity between Charest and Brown, I feel like Brown might be able to have more first place votes than even Charest. Like, I don't even think Charest would last long enough to get to the end game. I just don't see where his own popularity is coming from. I can see if he gets second place votes.
Right.
Right now, I'm having difficulty finding where he's getting the first place votes.
It's gonna be interesting. It's really gonna be interesting, because what we have to remember is that if we were thinking about, first past the post, it would be a completely different context. But what's special about the Conservative leadership race is that it's ranked ballot. So as you said, like second choice, first choice, as opposed to like, I'm gonna go vote for this MP or that MP or this candidate or that candidate. Excuse me. I think, I think Charest is yesterday's man in a lot of ways. So was Peter MacKay. Like, Peter MacKay came into the race in 2020 and everybody was like, he's going to clean house. And then he had like the most bizarre campaign messaging
Yeah.
that I think I have ever seen. Like, just these nonsensical, like, this word salad kind of that he would tweet out, and like didn't really have a position on anything. He just kind of blew with the wind. Whereas Aaron O'Toole at the time was pretending to be, masquerading as that true blue conservative candidate. This time around, I think Charest he's yesterday's man in that he comes from a different era of the party. There are some people in the current party, as in the caucus, that support that, but not nearly as many as there were. In the caucus, he certainly won't have a majority of support. I think that's clear. What matters is signing up members, and I'm torn between whether Charest would just hire a bunch of his old guys from the 80s who don't know how to run a campaign on social media, but I feel like he's not that stupid. Like, he's wanted to be the prime minister since he was 25 years old. His record is long in the tooth, and Pierre Poilievre loves a long record because he can use it to bash you in the face again and again for Twitter likes. Luckily for Jean Charest, while Twitter is important, campaigns aren't run solely on Twitter. So I think what I'm saying is we can't completely count Jean Charest out. It's not something that I would want to jump to conclusions about, because I think, like you said, with guys like Brown, Brown was my MP when I was living in Barrie, Ontario, and he was a city councillor before that, and he always had a good ability to organize people. And now there's, of course, allegations that there might have been fraud during his campaign for the PC leadership, but nevertheless, he's shown to be a guy that just knows how to network and knows how to pull people together. If he can pull people together, Charest runs a half-decent campaign, and then maybe you have a guy like Michael Chong, who's just always been a niche candidate, but there's always a few ardent supporters. There could be a progressive coalition there that could coalesce behind one of the three. May not be Mr. Charest, but I wouldn't count him out. I think it's too early. I think we're seeing a guy who's higher caliber than Peter MacKay ever was. It's whether he can outrun his record and run a social media age campaign.
Like I think the thing about Charest that maybe is bothering me, particularly with all the media coverage, is I do agree. I think there is an opportunity for him to maybe take the mantle, but just not with the strategy he's currently pursuing. And the reason for that is I think the reason why the media loves covering him is going to ultimately prove very self-defeating in the CPC race. Like, the media loves him because he is a man of the establishment. He's a man who defended federalism in Quebec. Some say
Right.
he really saved Confederation. He was
He's an old boy
of the No campaign in the 1995 referendum, and of course is long in the tooth in the being the premier of Quebec. But the CPC is such an anti-establishment party. It's like I look at Charest and I see a man who has very good communication skills. He clearly knows a lot of the key people in the Canadian media and political establishment to get a message out there, but he's consistently sending the wrong message. This is a man, if he could reframe himself, if he could try to tap in a little bit to the populist anger. I don't really know how we can do
That's
that.
what I mean. That doesn't. He doesn't come across like that kind of guy. I think you're right. Like,
yeah,
I think it's
know.
just it. That's
it's
it.
Like,
Plain and simple.
I think there's just a mess that he needs to find the correct message. Just like right now, he seems to be. I think he's sending a message to a type of voter that just doesn't really exist anymore. I think there's the potential for Tories to move into the centrist direction, but you need to go where they are. And like if you think of a guy like Donald Trump, and this is going to be this is a terrible comparison with Jean Charest. I'm sure that he'll hate us for doing this, but Donald Trump put forward some centrist policies, like particularly when it comes to Medicaid, for example, or let me think, or like income taxes. A lot of his central campaign messages stirred away from like the far right Republican taxation politics, but it's just centered where the populist anger was.
Sure.
And you can make a populist argument for some centrist policies if you want to do that. But I don't think Charest is capable of using that language, or he hasn't demonstrated himself to be capable of using that language. And I think that is where he's going to fail.
Interesting.
He needs to somehow make a populist argument for a centrist position, which is not easy, but I don't think it's impossible. I really don't see any other way of galvanizing this party's support unless he tries to reframe his issues in terms that this party is actually going to understand.
It's interesting, eh? Because when you're talking about the grassroots as it exists now, you're spot on. Now it's going to come down to memberships, and if Patrick Brown manages to pull a bunch of real people together, maybe he can, pull through and get enough that they could piggyback on him, or maybe they're piggybacking on someone else. So I think I wouldn't count at least the progressive faction out. But if we're talking about just the grassroots members, let's put the candidates aside, like the existing candidates, just the membership that exists right now before all these guys race off and sign as many people up as they can. It is more the Harperite populist style party. It's only gotten more. There was a bit of a pendulum swing where it got a bit more right under Scheer, and then, or about the same as it was in 15, and then it swung a little bit more to the center under Aaron O'Toole during the general, and now it has the potential to swing even farther to the right than Scheer or Harper ever went, or back to Aaron O'Toole territory. Now, I do think that if Charest does somehow win, if he pulls it off, which, he's a bit of a dark horse for sure, underdog, I think he'll have a tough time if he does want to pull back toward that centrist direction. He'll have a tough time unless he's ruthless like Stephen Harper. Like, he'll have to lead his party like Stephen Harper or Jean Chrétien to keep people in line. Like, there's just no way. And even they might not respect him enough at that. They might not respect him as much as they respected Stephen Harper. So who knows how that would work out, considering the caucus just booted Aaron O'Toole. So he has a challenge of connecting with a lot of the caucus, not all, but a lot of the caucus and a lot of the grassroots members. However, what's going to matter is, more than the caucus, what's going to matter is the amount of memberships these guys can pull. And the group is, yes, there's nuances between factions of the Tories, but the factions are very, very cut and dry, and basically the faction that manages to pull the most people on their side win. And historically that's been social conservatives, but social conservatives are feeling kind of lost. I think they're all going to get behind Leslie Lewis. Like, she's sort of the obvious one, but even the campaign Life Coalition doesn't want to even endorse anyone in the race, and doesn't want to endorse Poilievre because he's pro-choice. Yes, he's pretty conservative, but he's always been pro-choice. He's been on the record, maybe not always, but for quite some time he's been out, quote unquote, as pro-choice. And that's not something he's going to go back on. So they won't even endorse him. So, not that that's going to affect anything in the race. It's just interesting when you look at how the grassroots conservatives behave versus what is actually electable. I think Jean Charest is somebody that would, in a general, pull a lot of blue liberals over to his side. Maybe if he appeals to the working class somehow in some sort of center left platform, he could pull back a lot of NDP voters and unions. I think there's opportunities there, but he'd have to win the leadership, and that's going to be the challenge. It's going to come down to which faction can pull it off.
Yeah, it is interesting you said, because I have definitely noted this about Jean Charest's strategy so far, if we can even call it that, in the pre-leadership moment, is he does seem to be running more of a general election campaign than a leadership campaign. Mm-hmm. And particularly when it comes to dominating the Canadian media, he's getting the attention of people that I think are hopping between the Liberals and the Conservatives, but I don't think there's many people in that pool who are actually going to go out and buy a membership in the party. So that the Conservative brand right now is just as toxic to those centrist people as the Liberal brand is toxic to the Conservatives.
What about blue liberals? Like blue liberal. There's a lot of blue liberals out there who Trudeau has gone too far left for them for whatever reason. I don't think he's that far left, but there are people like my father who would say that fiscally he's gone way too far.
Yeah.
And I think my father would vote for a PC style, like kind of center, maybe slightly center left party that is fiscally disciplined, like the Chrétien era.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I can see how he would vote for that party in the general election. I don't see how a guy like that is going to go and buy a membership and get involved. Like, it's that, particularly if we have people like Leslie Lewis, or maybe there could be even farther right, like maybe even Bernier himself could re-enter the race, where there's going to be, I think there is for sure going to be a more factionalist far-right candidate in this race who's going to dominate some media headlines with, whether it's anti-abortion stuff, whether it's anti-gay stuff. There's going to be, I'm almost certain, like there is in every race, there's going to be some nutjob in there who's going to go even farther right than Poilievre, who's going to turn people off.
Yeah.
And is that going to make people angry enough that they want to take back the party? I mean, maybe if Charest can make that argument, I think it's more likely that if the Conservatives are teasing this farther right element, it's going to turn off more and more of those blue liberal voters.
Interesting.
But if there was going to be a populist message for Jean Charest to link everything together, I did like that National Post article you sent me where he was talking about the war in Ukraine, and I do think the war in Ukraine offers a very interesting opportunity for Charest. As everyone in the Canadian media establishment likes to comment on, he did very well in the 1995 Quebec referendum, and I think is like this voice into troubled times, like talking about we need adult leadership. Bringing up that he is this strong, experienced leader that's going to, bring order back in the chaos.
Those old Tories that are those old Tories that are like, we need a strong, principled leader with experience. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are like, kind of maybe fueling the fire. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Kind of pouring gas on the fire in terms of dog whistle politics and sort of flirting with conspiracy theories and Trump pumping. That's what I like to call it.
Trump pumping, excellent. Yes.
But so there's that sect of the party, but amongst that sect of the party, there are also those people who are like, we served in so many wars, we should be proud and blah, and we should be proud, but like. They kind of wrap themselves in the flag about it, and like, we need strong, principled leadership and a strong military. Like, I think Charest would appeal directly to those guys.
Yeah, I think if he can focus on that message, that actually could be a way that he can force himself in there. We can focus on his strengths, his oratory, his conviction, his dedication to message, and he keeps up that. The war drum, and we know that the war is going to be in the spotlight, and it's not really an issue that I think Poilievre has the greatest message on. Like when he talks about, we've had a weak response, it doesn't make sense to me what Poilievre has been saying on this issue. I think if Charest can make it his issue and he can talk in that flavor of voice that can attract the populace and sort of bring them over to his style of thinking, I think that's where he might have an opportunity. But he needs to stop playing footsie with the National Post and the Globe and Mail. He needs to actually start talking to more like the Ontario Prouds of the world. Like I think he's way too focused on the general election audience, and I don't think he's calculated the magnitude of the challenge it's going to be to actually reach these conservative voters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to see how it plays out. I don't think he's going to be somebody that's going to come to mind for most of the caucus members. I will concede that. I think there's a small but vocal sect of them left. But what it's going to come down to is how many memberships these guys can sell. Who are the people they're bringing in? How many people can they bring in? It's all about not just word of mouth, but a social media game. And can yesterday's man get today's people on his campaign? That's really the big question, I think, because maybe today's people will know how to tap into that populist message. But if he brings in yesterday's staff, he won't succeed. So it's going to be interesting once they actually start campaigning the way that Charest starts messaging. We saw a preview of it when he put out that invitation for his campaign launch on Thursday, built to win, and it's immediately sort of about his experience. And I think it's a good way to frame it, and it's a good way to frame I'm built to win not only the leadership but the general, but you have to top into something that the party cares about. I think it's going to be tricky for him to support something like carbon pricing in the leadership campaign. He may have to say he's sworn it off just to bullshit the grassroots and then pull an Aaron O'Toole, but then he has to be careful pulling an Aaron O'Toole because he doesn't want knives in his back. So it's going to depend on how ruthless he'll be and kind of how he can command respect and be feared to a certain extent in his party, because he's going to have to run a Chrétien style party, I think.
So I think Chrétien is a good example because I think he's the sort of the centrist guy who had the populist appeal. And so if I'm being Charest, trying to tap into my inner Chrétien, and I want to sell carbon taxing, I feel like it's not impossible to do to the CPC. What you have to do is say, like, I believe that a true leader doesn't lie to my voters. That's why I'm not going to be Aaron O'Toole. I'm going to be upfront with you. I'm going to tell you we're going to do this carbon pricing. I know it sucks. I know it's terrible. We're going to find some an offset or a reduction in personal income taxes to match it. This is what's required to win an election. And I'm not going to pull a fast one on you. I'm being upright and honest with you, the voter, because I care about you. I think you can pause that message a little bit, and voters will be respectful for the fact that you're not lying to them. But of course, it does open himself up to attack. But to be perfectly honest, I think I think simply because he is, that word liberal again, a former Quebec liberal, I think he's going to be attacked anyways. For being too centrist, regardless of what positions he takes.
Poilievre's already queuing up to beat him over the face.
Oh yeah, like we've seen already from Poilievre. So honestly, if I'm running that campaign, I'm saying you might as well take the centrist positions that you're going to take into the general. Be forthright. Be honest. Say that you don't think the Conservatives are dummies. That you can just tell them one thing one day and another thing the next. Show your integrity, because that's something that the CPC voters care about a lot. That's what they're constantly asked about. Integrity right. Comes up as their key message points in the House of Commons. So play with that and use it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We've got about 10 minutes left on this topic, so I'm adding time to the clock here because I like where
beautiful.
This is going. Let's use the last 10 minutes to talk about Pierre Poilievre. So he's an interesting case for me personally, because he's so sadistic when it comes to the way he plays politics. And I use the word sadistic because he doesn't care how sinister the source of the populist sentiment is. He taps into it because he knows that's what's going to pull the numbers. And I mean, my concern about Mr. Poilievre is he's going to put all his dice on what gets likes on Twitter, and maybe he's trying to account for that by sharing Google Docs links every single Twitter post because he wants to sign up as many people as he can. And I think he may very well succeed in that, but I just hope it doesn't become too brazen where everything's about sign up, and everybody's like just kind of, no one takes him seriously in the leadership. He's just the Twitter guy that makes the memes on Twitter. But I mean, he's got a lot of caucus support, and if he can sign up a lot of members, it won't matter what the rest of what caucus thinks or what the rest of the grassroots would think. So I would say he right now he's certainly the front runner among the caucus. And you've noticed probably his branding. There's no blue; it's black with white text. It's very bland, but like he's tapping into those like shades of black and gray that sort of imply you're further to the right. And he's saying Pierre for prime minister because he doesn't care about about being politically literate. The crew he talks to is oftentimes there's a chunk of them that are quite politically literate, and then there's a chunk of them that we saw in downtown Ottawa a few weeks ago that are quite big fans of his, and he brought them coffee and donuts. What a nice man. And it's gonna be tricky for him to win a general, but it'll be easier for him to win the leadership because he'll pull in a lot of people. He'll pull people over from the PPC, which is what a good faction of the party wants, is to pull people back from the PPC. And I think he's someone to watch out for sure. He's dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were having our pre-podcast discussion last week, we had brought up the point where it does seem that Poilievre is acting as if the real threat to him becoming prime minister, and he's running for prime minister, as you said, the real threat to him becoming prime minister is Max Bernier and the PPC. It's not the Liberals. It's not a threat from the center. It's a threat from the right and the far right. And I don't know if this was deliberate strategy, but I think the Poilievre getting trashed in the media for bringing donuts to the protesters, for attaching himself so closely to the protesters. That's obviously it's bad strategy for the general election, but I think it fits into his worldview where he thinks the real threats are. Because what he did was really take all the oxygen away from Maxime Bernier.
He sure did. Yeah.
He was there in Parliament Hill. Maxime Bernier really, really wanted to make this protest all about the PPC, and Poilievre took that opportunity right from him.
Yeah.
Poilievre made the convoy his issue, and I don't know if Poilievre did that because he genuinely believes in what the truckers wanted, or because Poilievre saw that this was a huge opportunity for his greatest political rival, Maxime Bernier, and he wanted to quash that opportunity from falling over to Bernier's camp.
I lean towards the latter for sure.
Yeah, like it could be accidental genius, or it could just be that this man is not only sadistic but also a good strategist. And it does. The problem is, I think it's based off of a false premise that he can actually hold the entire right wing together. If only he can reintegrate the PPC back into the Conservative Party, he'll be left with this huge portion of the electorate that isn't going anywhere, and then of course Liberals keep getting turned off with every election. So what was 35% in the last election is going to be the new 40% in the next election. That's just enough to get over the majority line. That's possible. I think more likely the PPCs are just filled by a bunch of anti-establishment types who will go home if Max Bernier is reintegrated into the CPC, and they're not really helping the Tories fix their problem, which is they're not appealing to centrist voters anymore.
Right.
So I guess those are the two versions of reality. Do we believe in a reality where we think that Liberals are going to stay home in the next election, in which case it's just the guy with the strongest message, the most coherent policies, who, he appeals to the dumbest of the dumb, but whatever, so long as they're the only people going to the polls, that's what matters, and that's how Poilievre gets his majority? Or do we think that the Liberals can actually hold it together just enough that, Poilievre doing his crazy talk, playing his crazy games, is going to be unable to cobble together a coalition strong enough to overwhelm the Liberals' much better strategic distribution of their voters.
It's gonna be, you know, that's a great question, and I think it's gonna come down to how good the Conservatives' ground game is this time. Number one, and it's going to come down to Pierre Poilievre somehow being able to miraculously dismantle the distaste anybody center or more left than that has for him. Because there's a lot of people, he's very polarizing, like Trudeau. It's the reverse of Trudeau. There's a lot of people in the Tories, or a lot of people out there who lean right, who like Pierre Poilievre. There are a lot of people who are not right that do not like Pierre Poilievre. And his name is known across the spectrum among Canadians. He's not somebody just you and I talk about. He was notorious for years because of the way he decides to do politics. It's hyper partisan. It's often negative. Or even if it's positive, it's hyper partisan. When he was a minister, his silly blue tie in that promo video, he just couldn't resist. And he saw the opportunity to quash Max Bernier, and he's very smart strategically at appealing to partisans, and he knows his audience. However, I don't know if he would be able to turn around his reputation enough to avoid losing votes in places where he should be winning them. I would find it difficult to see him win anything more than a minority. Maybe if Trudeau runs again, he's already unpopular. Maybe if he runs again and there's a massive scandal, like a huge embarrassing Gomery Commission level scandal, maybe Pierre would win a majority just out of pure anger or something like that. But basically barring a disaster circumstance for the Liberals, particularly with a new leader, I don't think there's any chance in hell he'd be able to pull off more than a minority. And if it's a new leader, I don't even know if he would win if it's the right leader. So I think it's, whereas Charest, he's not as popular amongst the grassroots, but I think he would be quite potent and quite a threat to centrist Liberals in the general.
Now, there is always a possibility that even if the Liberals do find some testicles on their bodies and remove Trudeau from his leadership role and pick a new leader, it's quite possible that leader could entirely bomb.
Oh, totally.
In the election.
Depends on the person.
And yeah, Trudeau definitely comes with a lot of baggage, but also he does have very enduring favorability ratings, spectacularly enduring. If you think of everything that his name has been dragged through in the last few years.
Yeah, he's likable.
And it's difficult. I mean, I think you and I, neither of us, we're both former Liberal 2015 campaign volunteers who became very disillusioned with the party as it continued in government. So I think both you and I would love to see that man defenestrated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that whoever would replace him would be able to galvanize the sort of support that he miraculously still can do it. And, with Poilievre, his central message for a lot of the last few months has been on inflation.
Yep.
And although that's taken a backseat to the war in Ukraine, those two are going to merge.
They already have.
Very soon. Yeah, exactly. Like we see gas prices going up, especially in Canada. It's such a large
Everybody's
country.
Talking about it.
All of transportation is a huge cost that's added to almost all of our goods, and the price of fuel is going to dramatically increase the cost of all of our goods at home. We know that eventually people are going to get tired of seeing bombed out cities and poor refugees. They're going to start talking about what's in their fridge and why it costs more to buy milk. That's an issue that's waiting for Pierre Poilievre.
It's waiting for him to run on and make his debut.
Exactly, and it shifts attention from more of the troubling far right things that he has said. If he can fight an entire campaign strictly on inflation. And that'd be difficult, but it's definitely not impossible. He could, I think he could. There's a scenario where he could very easily pull
There
that
is, yeah.
off. It would be a sleight of hand for sure. It would
It'd be a
be
challenge, but an uphill battle, but he could pull it off.
yeah, and there's always and it's very difficult to, and I'm, the more that I'm saying this, the more I sort of see the secret genius behind his strategy, because to be honest, I think the strategy only works if the PPC has already been defeated before the election.
Yeah.
I think the thing that was pulling the conservatives to the right in the last election, where they had this like really uncomfortable flip flopping on guns, for example, was because they felt that pressure from the PPC. But if Poilievre can diffuse that before the election, if he can reintegrate the essential parts of the PPC back into the CPC, then he can change the channel when he wants to. He doesn't need to appeal to the red meat, because he's got the base voters already concentrated, and then he can focus on his key messages to those, to the mushy middle, to get his majority. But if he's still if he's in the general still playing catch up with the right, then he's lost for sure. So maybe I hate to say this about Pierre Poilievre, but maybe he actually has more than a couple brain cells up there. He seems, maybe it is the right that he needs to tackle, and then work towards the center in the general election.
I think for sure
it's not the way I would do it, but it might actually be the winning
no.
strategy.
I think for sure you're bang on about his strategy. For both for the leadership and the general. I think the challenge will be the Liberals are devastatingly effective at digging up your past sins and just beating you over the face with them. It's been one of their.
But is it going to work 3 times in a row? Is it going to work three? Is it going to work 3 times?
That's the question. That's the question, because I mean everybody remembers Paul Martin going for a 4th consecutive Liberal mandate, going hard negative with an ad that made absolutely no sense in reality. That everybody laughed at. So I think if the Liberals are that dramatic, like if they're like Pierre Poilievre is the worst human being to walk the planet, so like then
he's gonna put guns on the streets.
like then that might not work out so well. However, I think if they go like, hey, just so you know, here's the conspiracy theories this guy's indulging in. Here's the, if you can kind of paint him like that, then they're very good at framing. During campaigns, I wouldn't put it past him to be able to frame him as this devilish, like, conspiracy, unlikable guy. And to be honest, he's not really, like, people when they hear him talk for any extended period of time, if they're not conservative, I would even argue if they're not, like, center-right, if they're centrist or more left, they just, like, when he talks, it's just, like, nobody likes to even hear his voice. And I do not like Pierre Poilievre, so I'm certainly biased. But like, I feel like his style is very polarizing, because if you like what he does, which is this sort of, it's soaked in spin, and it taps on the red meat of his audience. So if you're that audience, if you are his audience, you love this man. If you are not his leadership campaign audience, I would argue he's just too. Even in the general, he's just going to be too hyper partisan. I feel like they'll sanitize him. They'll do sort of like a Tom Mulcair, where instead of like trying to smile, sometimes it'll be like kind of tone down the partisan rhetoric a little bit, because usually people do for the general. But I feel like he won't be, like Charest won't be capable. Like you were saying, you don't think Charest will be capable of pulling off a social media age campaign against someone like Pierre Poilievre. I think I struggle to see whether Pierre Poilievre would be able to convince enough of the general electorate that he is their guy. Sure, he could pursue centrist policies. I think he could pull it off with inflation alone. If inflation is as bad then as it is now, and if Trudeau is as unpopular then as he is now or more, and he is the leader, then I think Pierre Poilievre could pull it off. If it's a weak new Liberal leader, he could pull it off. I think if it's somebody like Chrystia Freeland, or if it's somebody like Anita Anand, or somebody of that caliber in the cabinet, or even somebody from the outside that comes in and has really good organizing and they're really competent, I think he will have trouble pulling enough of the general electorate away from voting for a center-left party.
No, that's perfectly reasonable. I think my greatest fear for the Liberal Party is that if Pierre Poilievre, if PP wins the CPC leadership, I feel like that gives Trudeau the excuse he's been looking for to stay in as prime minister, to not step away, to say, this guy, he's the one that was standing with the people waving swastikas. I can't possibly step down at a time like this. He's a threat to Canadian unity. I have to rise to the occasion.
And us versus them
I need
thing.
to have my Pierre Trudeau moment.
Yeah.
And exactly. It does really activate a vanity that you and I both know, because we know the prime minister. Like, we met him. We know that he has the side of him that can be turned on, and that's the side that everyone outside of the cult of personality hates about this guy.
Yeah.
And that's a really lethal cocktail. When Trudeau gets holier than thou, especially a guy who's been we've seen him in blackface, we've seen him in the SNC Lavalin scandal, we've seen him break his promises. This is the guy. This is the last person to be giving moral lessons, but there's no one else in the world who loves giving moral lessons more. And it's gonna go down like a lead balloon. But I'm convinced that if that's what happened, because it's him and his team. They can't see outside their own arrogance.
Yeah,
and it's
and
they're going to sink the country, I think, if they let themselves.
I think there's a temptation amongst this crew to just beat the drum of. I mean, we saw it in the campaign where we'll remember, or we'll remember, but most people won't remember. During the campaign, prior to the campaign, in summer 2020, he was asked about vaccine mandates, and he said, "Oh, I don't like the idea of that. That we don't want to go there." Then they, I think, sensibly introduced it. That's fine. I'm not bickering about the policy. What I'm bickering about is suddenly during the campaign, in the midst of all these angry PPC protesters that were storming his campaign events, he suddenly goes hard negative on these people, and he's kept it up for months. And I think he thought that maybe in the beginning, maybe he could convince enough people to get vaccinated that we'd be able to get out of this. And there was something to be said at that time for sort of a moral spanking, because people were fed up. So there was a little bit of a moral spanking, and then but I think it's gone on so long to the point where we've seen some people just snap. And I think the debate on whether the Liberals should change tack is a valid one, and I think he would have trouble in the future campaign, if he beats that drum again. He's gonna have to do the past Trudeau thing, the 2015 and 2019 thing, where he taps into people's moral good. If he wants to go hard negative, I don't know if he can pull that off, because they'll just see him, oh, look at this guy we hate being insufferable. He's going to have to be really hard to go back to a more likable Trudeau and outrun his record. I think that's sort of his key. And on that note, thanks so much for listening along today. If you guys have thoughts on how to make the show better, if you found my missing wristwatch, or just want to send hate mail, you can direct it to speechfromthethrone@gmail.com. That's speechfromthethrone@gmail.com.
See you again soon.